I'm not a fan of GLP-1s because they make you lazier. They make you like have poor food habits. And then you get the classic question, I came off Ozempic, what's next? It's like, that shouldn't be the question you ask. You should know because you've refined these skills. So let's say you want to lose weight or build muscle. The first thing you should ask is, what lets me build more muscle next or lose more fat next, rather than trying to jump right to it. Like, instead of saying day one of losing fat is, I'm going to jack up the stimulants, take some aspirin, and take some ephedrine, we're going to get shredded right away. It's like, no, you shouldn't even consider that until 3 or 4 months down the line. You need to buy yourself an opportunity. You can't build the muscle or you can't lose the fat because you don't have the tools. You're not sitting on the magic answers and just not doing it. You have to build the tools and skills, and then you could get what you want.
Hey everybody, I'm really excited to be here today with Andy Triana. Andy is of GoSuperbrain.com. He is a sports physiologist, a strongman, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, but I think probably above all else, Andy is just a unique and novel thinker in the space of learning and really applied sports performance. Andy works with super high level athletes, professional athletes around the world, and delivers them amazing results. So I'm just super excited to be with you here today. Thanks so much, Andy.
Oh, my pleasure, especially when a good mutual friend like Julian Childs connects us. I'm even more excited to be here today.
Yeah, Julian is the man. Big shout out to Julian.
Absolutely.
So I want to talk about a bunch of stuff. I think I'll start kind of with a focus on learning and sports performance, and maybe we'll sort of go from there. Cool. So let's take something like, again, really simple, like a squat. And let's imagine a trainee who's been doing the squat for a period of time. A coach could work with that trainee and help improve their form, right? We might call this skill acquisition. So maybe you could do something like that in a day where you're focusing on greater efficiency of movement, you're getting rid of unnecessary tension, or maybe focusing that tension in the right places. And then maybe you would cement those gains over a 4 to 8 week training block, right? And again, maybe this is all skill acquisition, skill retention. Then conversely, you could imagine, right, the strength athlete, very typical, goes through in a 4 to 8 week strength cycle. We're not seeking to put muscle on their frame, like let's say they're a weight class athlete, right? But we're focusing on improving motor recruitment, that neurological connection. So we're still training the movement, right? We're training them to perform that movement better. But I would say that emphasis is more on neurology rather than maybe cognition or comprehension. And so that's kind of where my question lies, is like, between these two examples, is there actually a difference? Like, are both of these things learning? Is one seems like skill acquisition. Is that skill acquisition different than motor learning? Is there some kind of actual difference?
Fantastic question. And I think therein lies, we got to go back to the neuron a little bit. When a neuron is dormant, it's not electrically active. Where does the information go? Electricity traveling through a synapse or into another neuromuscular junction, wherever you are in that chain. It's not just dumb electricity flowing through stuff. There's information attached to that. So think about the concept of drunk memories or episodic memories when you go to a place, right? That information containing portion of the hippocampus, wherever it may be, is dormant until electrically active. So let's take something mega simple, like a vertical toss. The information traveling along with that electricity is going to be relatively simple. And that's where you get a lot of motor recruitment, simple things. Our body wants to do safe. Pain and restrictions anticipatory. So imagine as like a ratio of electrical activation to information coming along with it. And we see this start to split also in like the creatine concept is really what you're getting at. Are we ripping creatine phosphate, or are we very precisely doing something in the skill zone? They're the same concept, but two like 80-20 mirror images of each other are the same coin, right? So imagine now a skill sport where force production, maybe it's a golf swing, a baseball swing, darts even, or just for squat, it's complex for most people who aren't elite athletes. Same concept and skill. And I want, let's say, near 100% accuracy. We automatically recognize, even if we're doing a chest press, we have to alter load and other variables involved with the motion to get that information attached to that electricity just right. Oftentimes we see coaches describe this as rhythm, flow, smoothness. Recently I remember I was at the gym, and I go to like a regular normal gym. My life's weird at the moment, but they have great hours. I can do what I need to do, whatever, right? And I spotted a guy on bench, and he was clearly strong enough to get the reps, if not more reps, but he was like forcing it, like metaphorically choking it to death, like ripping it down, ripping it up, like horrible flow. And I was like, hey man, like you just got to be smoother and trust it, and you'll get more reps next time. And he didn't understand that paradox. So it's a long-winded way of getting back to your question. Yes, there is a difference. It's to what degree does this information need to be precise enough, not just to complete the task safely and what we want, but to decipher between two small techniques. So oftentimes when people ask me, why are you not a huge fan of the 3x10 or like mechanical tension research for hypertrophy? I tell them, among many reasons, those 10 reps you did in the same set are oftentimes not the same motor pattern when we look at what you're actually doing. And when we look at that extrapolated over months and years, you end up getting totally different outcomes and totally different distributions of fiber activation and of fiber damage. And then, to go along with it, as you get more fit, you get less desaturation, you get less pH response to that same 3x10, and the whole thing changes. So as the skill gets more complex, it's like this reverse balancing act. As it increases in complexity, there's a smaller window of optimal electricity, force, speed, etc., that you can do it really well with. And then conversely, like, the deadlift, there's a lot of different techniques on the deadlift as opposed to squat. If we had to pick how people do it, there's a lot of different ways to do a deadlift by comparison, right? And that's because as it becomes simpler, we can apply more different patterns with more force and more, safely, because really the versatility that all humans can do a motion with tells us it's safety in my mind. If we can interpret this 50 different ways and be fine for the most part, that actually means it's a safer movement, not a less safe movement. Now think about powerlifting. The bench press has the fewest different types of techniques. You know what I mean? There's, it's a lot easier. What do we hear people get hurt the most on? Bench pressing for the most part, really, especially your average gym bro. It's bench press that hurts the most people.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've never actually thought about that before, right? So you're essentially saying that if any movement can be performed in a variety of ways, that's simpler. And so that lets us train that movement with more variety. Can we get, like, if the deadlift can be performed hypothetically 50 different ways, can I train it 49 of those 50 ways and still get carryover to each of those ultimate results?
Yeah, so what gets us transfer is not goniometric angles or just putting a joint. So this is to make it a little more logical for some of the viewers, right? Let's say we took a squat and your knees at this degrees, ankle at this degrees, and we simply just mimicked it on the leg press. You wouldn't get transfer outside of just the local muscle damage and glycogen from the leg press.
Right, I mean, you might make your quads bigger, right? But you're not actually getting transfer to the movement.
Right. But what would give you transfer, and we know this generally, I like to, when we get confounding questions, I like to look at what real life is true and kind of gain from that. So we know for sure that the best squatters, strongest squatters that really don't even need to squat to be good at it are sprinters, jumpers, hyper explosive athletes. So why is that? They probably squat less than a lot of people who squat, and I could bet you that we could take a lot of guys in the NFL sprinting Olympics. Even some of the bigger boys in the wrestling world, and I bet they could out-squat a vast majority of non-elite powerlifters. It's because neurology takes over the simpler the motion is. So squat and deadlift, pretty much everyone could do that right. So because there's not a lot of information paired with that electricity, let's say, we could train just about anyone to be a good squatter. We can't train just about anyone to have a super nice golf swing or a super nice slap shot in hockey, right? Sure, a lot of people can, but it gets way smaller amount of people and it's way harder. Right? If you wanted to squat, and you've never done it before, maybe a year or two, really, you can get good in squats. If you've never swung a golf club or a baseball bat before, and you're like, I want to get good at this, it's certainly going to be more than a year or two.
And is a simple heuristic for that? Are we essentially saying for those more complex movements, right, like a golf swing, are there essentially fewer correct ways to execute that movement? and
Yep.
thus there's a higher bar for the neurology required to execute that task.
Yep, and the physics. The half a degree in baseball, wrestling, golf has a negative outcome for the most part. Half a degree on squat and deadlifts, most
Right,
people.
right, right, right. So the precision required is significantly greater.
Yep, so let's say, random made up electrical value. Let's say 100 millivolts is perfect for you to shoot a wrestling shot or for your golf swing. 105, because of the laws of electricity, we send more than one signal. So now, in fact, 105 the first time is going to be a deficit of 5 on the next time. So if we get 105 again, now it's an electrical deficit of 10. You do it a third time, it's 15. And we're not doing one contraction only when we squeeze on a bicep curl even. It's not one electrical stimuli most of the time, it's multiple. So that's why it's that weird, awkward flow we can all pick up on in people's forms, like little shakiness, little awkward body motions. There's several different electrical signals being sent, and there's a discrepancy because none of them are perfect. So it's like +3, -5, +2, -7, and like there's a discrepancy. And the better athletes, in theory, have smaller discrepancies. Yeah. Exactly.
It's really, I mean, this is so fascinating to me. So, because I would say that when laymen talk about this, when I talk about this, I would use words like talent and skill, and you're talking about electricity, right? So I mean, like, so when you, which I'm not obviously like, I think your conceptualization is very accurate, but like, how do you when you're looking at someone who is able to perform at a very high level, what is it that you think is happening? Like, what, right? As you said, not everyone can learn how to properly swing a golf club. Is that is that something that is truly innate because of their electrical wiring? Like, where are the limits to that?
A little bit, because what causes us to learn is electricity is like, imagine the foundation of the nutritional pillar, right? Or the nutritional pyramid, whatever the hell it is, right? That foundation's electricity. If you can't get your neurons red hot and get into LTP, you'll never learn in the first place. And that's just how we move along the way. But there's just some people who the first time they pick something up, they just kind of do it right, almost off
Yeah.
the bat.
Yeah.
And that's what I believe talent is. I believe talent and like those like epigenetic gifts, if you will, are when you're outside the norm. So let's say like hormone sensitive lipase. We could change that enzyme a lot in 4 weeks. Let's say I give you, a standard block of X, Y, or Z. And based on who I see in front of me and, anecdotal experience with other people, I think this will take you 4 to 5 weeks to get the results. And you get them in 2.5. That's like a genetic talent, if you will, right? It's anomalies because and I think I'm optimistic in that viewpoint because I think far too many people quit early. They're like, oh, I've been trying to lean out for 16 weeks and it didn't happen. It's like, well, I mean, 16 weeks is barely enough to turn on some genes. You know what I mean? So really, week 16 is day 1 of you beginning to make progress. And that's as simple as fat loss. Now imagine your goal is to get up to maybe you're in your 40s, you've never really run fast before, and your goal is to sprint. It's relatively complex, right? So automatically our timeline, we're talking years, we're not talking months. So then you get caught up in the minutia, blah, 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 and along the way you don't recognize that it's going to take you at least 9 months just to get your neurons to be molded, if you will. Because when we talk about myelination, the dendritic fingers that change, they really just mold in shape and size and stuff. So it's going to take us let's say 9 months because you've never done this before just to get a template for your neurons to figure out what's going on first. Let's say if you go to do something the first time, you're like, oh, I can't really feel what's going on. It's like, yeah, because you're at ground zero. You can't feel something you've never done before. You're going to need a bunch of reps just to make mistakes and troubleshoot to be like, this is at least worth the crap. And then you'll differentiate between worth the crap and better than that and worse than that. Differentiation is how our motor cortex works. It doesn't learn like a radar. It's like, oh, beep, 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 do this. It's like, I did that. That cost me a couple ATP molecules than I wanted. I don't like putting my femur in that position. And honestly, the path of the bar on a squat, let's say, just wasn't smooth. Bad physics. So we'll give that motor pattern number 3, like a red light, a thumbs down. Then it's like, ooh, that was a good one. Think about the whole purpose of warming up emotion, right? Is simply just that. It's electrically and sensory motor wise aligning yourself for the day. I work with a lot of competitive golfers, and one of the things that you talk about is like the goals of what you're doing in front of you. It's far too easy, whether it's a squat, a baseball swing, a sprint, or a golf swing, especially as you get better, to have all this overwhelming feelings and thinking, like aspects of it. When in reality, the warm up is just giving your brain an electrical threshold for the moment. Was that too much or too little? Yes or no? Was it left or right? Yes or no? Cool. And then you can move on, right? Because how many times has 135 felt like crap? 225 feels like crap, but it's like, all right, 315 for 8's the remedy today. 275 is like, put on 315, your first set's actually pretty good. If we looked at that logically on paper, it shouldn't make sense, right? 135 should be the easiest no matter what, but what we see is true. And that's what kind of led me to that opinion as well.
Mm. Okay, so do you observe that in higher level athletes that there's sort of greater automaticity of action, that they're not as emotionally engaged in those processes, or is it more that they can sort of balance that, right, and find what signals are useful, use those signals to inform their actions?
It's funny. So in the real world, not always, but a lot of times, again, talents like their motor cortex just doesn't change that much. Whether they're having a complete
Yeah,
meltdown
yeah.
or not, they do the same pattern. And that's again that's what real talent is. Most of us have a meltdown and everything's horrible, right? I've seen people have meltdowns and still have more talent than everyone else on the field. In multiple sports, and that's the cool part. It's real stressful on your life long term, which is why I've gotten into the entrepreneurial stuff. But like when you get immersed into an athlete's story, which is how pro sports really work, you don't work with 20, 40, 50 people in pro sports for the most part. At least I don't. I create like journeys with people. And it's usually like between 5 and 6, roughly, more or less at a time. And as you see it, you see the ailments and the talents that they have and how they have to balance themselves out.
No, that really resonates with me. I was a musician growing up, and I was always like good to mediocre, but I felt that if I wanted to be my best, like I had to do X, Y, and Z, like I needed to be fully warmed up, I needed to be prepared, I needed to have everything kind of set out correctly. But I would play with people who could just fucking start and blow and be amazing. Right? Like it wouldn't matter what was happening, it wouldn't matter where they came, they didn't need to warm up their voice, they didn't need to be like emotionally centered. They could just play. And I was like, oh, I like there's no amount of practice I can do to become that. Like because right, like because I have to practice to do that and they don't. So like how can I reach that state? It
Yes,
always seemed impossible.
with that individual synergy we can, but that is the genetic and talent aspect of the world. I've seen some athletes do, like, I'm thinking about music, right? How often do you hear like, oh, so and so was so inebriated they couldn't speak? But it's like, wait, does that mean like 2 drinks less than that they would have given an incredible concert? You know what I mean? It's like, wow,
Right.
that's really true for some of the most talented. And every now and then I love, because it humbles me what we see in real life. I've seen an athlete drop their resting heart rate over 30 beats in 2 weeks. I've seen an athlete in 1 year go from 26 to 12% body fat and gain 7 pounds of lean tissue. Stuff that like you shouldn't be able to do, but it's like, well, I spent most of the year with this guy and I watched it happen. So it's like, you also makes you think different when you see that stuff, right?
No, totally. Yeah, I mean, right. I mean, the spectrum of change a human can undergo is unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, and you really, and to your point earlier about just like not knowing how long things will take, you don't know, like right, like things people can make remarkable changes in a short period of time. It really a lot of it is about concerted effort that's focused on a particular path, and that can be sufficient to achieve real results. But it is. I think the word you use is inspiring, right? It really is.
And yeah, a lot of people don't have a good idea of what consistency is, and that's what you said. Like I kind of earlier, I made like this analogy that they jump to conclusions. Like you're on a 3-year path, and you're worried about week 2, day 4.
And so particularly for you, because you're working with, I mean, I know you work with all levels, but a lot of high level athletes, are you giving them a long-term plan? Or are you actually sort of like, you may have a long-term plan for them, but are you actually sort of doling it out to them piecemeal so that they focus on things sequentially? What's their kind of sense of timing?
Everyone's so different. There are some people that want the long-term plan and they want a lot of responsibility on their plate. It's as simple as, hey, in 2 months, I need to see this change. Here are my recommendations. Call me back in 2 months, make sure this happens. And they're like, call me back 2 months to the day. All right, this happens. An 8-minute conversation, hang up the phone, talk again for 9 minutes in 2 months. You know, some people are just like that, right? Think about the same way like business or a coffee shop when you go to buy something. It's all the same, right? Who's in front of you dictates the platform. But for the majority, I would say most people, whether they're regular Joes or pro athletes, most people just have a lot on their plate. So oftentimes, especially recently, I've just kind of resorted to getting the most out of the least with my words and then letting the conversation flow from there. Like, hey, at bare minimum, do this. And if you're going to want to do more, you're going to ask me a question subsequently. So it's almost, I don't need to say that much.
Right, you're sort of letting them dictate the pace and the flow. That makes sense.
Certainly, because pro sports has the lowest retention and the lowest life of working with people because they're all there without you, right? A lot of times, you create a relationship with someone where you're with them for their whole career, just like you do with a personal training client every now and then. It's even more rare in pro sports. Every single athlete on that field, whatever it is, made it there and would have made it there without, for the most part, most of the people they interacted with. Because think about it, most of them are just so blindly faith determined that they could, go get drunk 7 days a week and they still are more dedicated than you with impediments in their path, right? Like how often do you hear about like so-and-so struggling with like gambling or alcohol and they're hitting, like 27 plus home runs a season and like they're struggling and they're still way better than you. And it's not a mean thing. It's just like we all have to accept where we fall into place in life, right? There's a perfect spot for every one of us, and you can't be upset because yours isn't being on the PGA Tour or like the MLB.
Man, I love that because I just feel like people are actually super critical of high performing athletes, musicians, etc. Right? They will criticize them for those personal failings. But I think part of it is informed by what you just said, is that despite the fact that they may not be meeting the expectations of society, they're blowing us away in other areas. Right? They're performing above par, vastly above par, while being handicapped, while the rest of us are not handicapped and still performing essentially at par. Right, like that's I mean, like, I know I've never actually thought about, I've never heard that articulated the way you did. I think that probably breeds some resentment among us normal-bodied folk, right? Like, I mean, it's like we have to do all this shit, and we're still not as good as you, and you can go out and get drunk 7 days a week and run circles around us.
But you said it, right? It's consistency, right? Because the funny thing that I've noticed is a lot of wonderful athletes, executives are regular people too, in the sense of we all have vices, we all mess up, we all do this stuff. But the difference is when you miss 2 meals, you're like, oh, I can't go to the gym. They miss 2 meals, they're like, oh, I want to be the best in the world more than I want to eat. So I'm going to go to the gym whether I have 0 meals, whether my blood alcohol is 1.2 or 000, I'm still going to go do these things. And that's what I mean by their blind faith. They even know some things are hurting them, but I'm going to be the best in the world anyway. And so often we quit on ourselves or fall short of a 3-year goal week 2, day 4, because like it didn't feel right or your tummy hurts or like a fart came out weird. And like you're all up in arms, right? But like these people, again, like oftentimes make mistakes or do this stuff or getting drunk 7 days a week, but they're still practicing for 6 hours. It's like you have 2 drinks and my sleep is bad. I'm going to sleep in and skip the gym today.
Yeah, I mean the way it seems to me is that I would say most people are looking for reasons to quit, and I would say the high performing athlete, etc., is looking for the opposite. Right? Maybe not even looking; they're just determined to continue.
Yeah, they have this insane appreciation of their will and choice and agency to do things. I'm going to be the best in the world. Period. Like I could have Chinese food or Italian food. I will still be
Right, I'll still be the best.
And we're all way too willing to edit that sentence for ourselves. Like whenever I do like mentorships or help people out, I say create a definition, like an appendix for yourself of 1-sentence definitions for words and things that confuse you. Cortisol, a ligand that turns non-glucose molecules into glucose, period. Like, and then you add to it as you get more comfortable and complex. But start incredibly simple. I am going to make the scale number go down. Worry about how you do it later. Just get it to go down. Like, stop eating McDonald's. Like, just make it not go up. We all know how to make it not go up. We don't need to pay like the most fancy person in the world. If you want to be dialed and get incredible results and have your cake and eat it too, that's what you need to do. But if you simply just don't want the scale to go up and you can't do that on your own, that's the problem you need to thwart before you even worry about your macros.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Why do you think that is that people seem to be drawn to this kind of masturbation over complexity?
I think it's because it gives you an out, right? Oh, like think about this. Glycogen of the liver storage and metformin. Before metformin got widespread and popular, you had to do it the good old-fashioned way. Like, deplete your liver on your own and then don't replete it. Now people are like, oh, just take metformin, you're fine. And you'll stop liver glycogenolysis and get the effects of blood norepinephrine. That's wonderful, but one, it's not quite the same of doing it the old-fashioned way because you don't get all the and associative enzymatic changes that come with this ligand. And additionally, you didn't learn the food discipline it takes to get that hepatic liver glycogen storage low. So that when it gets low and you get that hunger signal, you're certainly going to mess it up. Right?
It's interesting to me because it just sort of has there's similarities between what we were talking about before about the simplicity of patterns, right? Like your body is looking to move as efficiently as possible, to use as little electricity as possible. And then I would say that it seems like there's a parallel in our psychology where we are essentially looking to do as little as possible at all times,
Yeah.
right? I mean, is that an overstretch, do you think? Am I connecting? I mean, we're having this conversation, so I'm making these connections, but should I not connect those two concepts, do you think?
No, I like that, right? Because like we have, no matter what thoughts run through your head, you still get to send that signal on what happens. It's the brain that changes itself, and his sequel, The Brain's Way of Healing by Norman Doidge, that made me realize that like neuroplasticity, this is how I know I'm one of the biggest nerds ever. Neuroplasticity made me realize anything is possible. Right? We can go, like, there's 4 types of neuroplasticity. One of the coolest ones I think is called compensatory masquerade, meaning we can change what's happening in an area because of a trauma. And there's a lot of, like, obviously 3 other types that we could talk about. But most importantly, it's like, wow, like, think about Monkey, that famous study where they cut off the arm and, like, saw how the neuromuscular areas change in the brain as well. Even without an arm, you can have ghost pain, and the neurons associated in the brain don't die. They find a new job. Like if your arm can get cut off and your brain doesn't quit on you, why did you quit on yourself so soon, right? I think we've just become like, softer and softer, right? Like think about it's so easy to cheat on your diet now. When I was like wrestling in high school, it was like, oh, well, there's no food in the fridge and like mom doesn't have anything. So like I literally physically can't eat bad because there's nothing in the house. You don't even have to leave your house anymore with Uber Eats. It can get there so fast. Like in cities, we have GoPuff, where GoPuff gets you even faster than that, right? So it's like just in a world, it makes me sound like an old guy, but like in a world that just gets easier and easier and easier, your decision-making processes, your agency, and your action become more important, not less important.
Yeah, because you could always choose the path of least resistance, right? You did not have that option, right? My ancestors, your ancestors had to work hard. There was simply no choice. The thing I always think about, my great some 4 generations back, his job was to lead the mule down into the mine. Like that's what he did, right? Like that's a fucking hard life. I don't know what that mine was like. I don't know what that mule was like, but there's no way to optimize that process. Right? No amount of metformin is going to make it such that his muscles won't be tired at the end of the day. Like, no, man, your life sucks. And so you have to be more robust as an organism to be able to deal with those kind of stressors. You just have
Yeah.
no choice.
Yeah, and that's why you can't handle the appetite after the metformin, because on the way to that liver glycogen getting down, you make a commitment. It's going to take several days.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this. Each day, you sharpen your food discipline sword a little more. Metformin wonderfully can make you jump those steps. You better be ready to drink that cup, though.
Yeah.
Right? You better be ready to handle triple the appetite temptations because you didn't chip away at making it first. And if you can do that, more power to you. But that's why a lot of times the good old-fashioned discipline, like hard-nosed ignorance is bliss faith way, gets people results still to this day. Like when you look at old people oftentimes who are like still kicking and still look awesome, in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, it's just like a lot of times like hard-nosed consistency. Like I'm going to do this every darn day. There's something to be said. Like there's so much cool stuff about ketosis and all these wonderful, whether you do a fast of water and food or just fast from food, there are really cool things that can happen. And we see that evolutionarily, these people had to suffer. They didn't do it because I just don't like the way this robe fits me. Like, I'm going to fast, and try to get this robe and to fit better. It's like, no, it's like you fast because you ran out of X, Y, or Z, and until you get more X, Y, or Z, that's just all you had, and it's just, it's easiness is wonderful. Convenience and focused attention are the most expensive and appropriately charged things in the world. That's why consultations and convenience drive up the price of everything like luxury. However, you need to be ready to drink that cup, like I said.
So what do you think? So for an athlete, for a normal everyday Joe, right, who isn't a professional caliber athlete, I'm not saying they're weak, but they're just like a person of normal constitution. How would you try to encourage them to do, I guess, voluntarily introduce more difficulty into their life?
Yeah, I think, look, we can't escape the convenience, nor should we ignore technology. So one of the recommendations I give people when they're looking to try some type of weight loss drug, let's say, I say choose MOTS-C. Why is that? MOTS-C is amplified by AMPK, which is the breakdown process of energy when we exercise. So you could take your MOTS-C dose and take a tenth of it, and it will work better if you've previously fasted or done a proper exercise. So using it also enhances good habits. Right? One of the reasons why I don't love caffeine for people is it reduces appetite, right? So then people start under eating and overstimulating, which leads to them not being able to handle themselves later, then they overeat later. So I just really recommend think twice when you make a decision about something you're going to do and ask yourself how is this going to serve me thereafter? I'm not a fan of GLP-1s because they make you lazier. They make you have poor food habits. And then you get the classic question, I came off Ozempic, what's next? It's that shouldn't be the question you ask. You should know because you've refined these skills. So let's say you want to lose weight or build muscle. The first thing you should ask is what lets me build more muscle next or lose more fat next, rather than trying to jump right to it. Instead of saying day one of losing fat is I'm going to jack up the stimulants, take some aspirin and take some ephedrine, we're going to get shredded right away. It's no, you shouldn't even consider that until 3 or 4 months down the line. You need to buy yourself an opportunity. You can't build the muscle or you can't lose the fat because you don't have the tools. You're not sitting on the magic answers and just not doing it. You have to build the tools and skills, and then you could get what you want. And I think, again, it's a framework, right? So if your goal is to lose weight and the first thing you do is start pulling food from your diet, it's how long are you going to last on this diet?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've got a big emphasis on longer term thinking, second order consequences, and just being iterative with your processes. Right? I mean, you brought that up too with your sort of example of the one sentence definition of things. It's start with the most simple, clearest implementable thing, and then add complexity and steps over time.
Absolutely, because we all respond so differently, right? And you will learn more about yourself as well along the way. It's hey, when I did this, it took a long time to get results, and I added this in, and everything changed. So then all of a sudden people give what you added in all the credit, when in reality it's what you did leading up to it, and that maybe just was the last piece of the puzzle or amplified your weakest link, and so on and so forth, not giving proper credit to everything you did prior.
Yeah, I always have found that to be really frustrating in the realm of just strength training in general. You'll see a lot of content and recommendations. It's I added this one exercise and I my bench press jumped 30 pounds. And it's well, wait though, what were you doing for the 6 months prior, the 3 months prior? What were all of the other factors? You don't know that variable you just changed is having an impact right now. You're not running, unless you were actually running a real Bayesian science experiment and controlling everything, that's probably not what was happening. But you're we just have this recency bias where you think that the thing you just did today is having the most impact. But I think you're right, that is just not how these systems work.
Yeah, and I think there's power in that, right? The industries follow what consumers consume. So people are saying, I want this quick 6-week change. I don't give a crap. So providers will naturally either have to listen to the consumer or go through the difficulty of educating them and changing their mind. Everyone wants to make money, so we appease people and we allow that to happen. And we're like, hey, if you lose the weight in 6 weeks, great. That's all you asked for. You didn't tell me to make you healthier. You just said you wanted to fit in that dress in 6 weeks. Boom, I did that for you. It's done. It's like the good friend, bad friend concept, right? Is the good friend the one who watches out for you, or is the good friend the one who's like, don't think about tomorrow, man? Like YOLO, like only think about today. Like which one is the good friend or the bad friend?
Yeah, and I actually think I think it's kind of up to you, right? I mean, I don't know that we should delve too deeply into morality, but ultimately, like, you have to adhere to your own code. And I think that you're right at some point. I don't think it would be just to make it such that, like, as service provider, it is not the job of every service provider to fix an industry, right? As you said, people have their own desires and needs. It should be ethical to meet those needs. Whether or not those needs should be met, right, is a totally different question. But like, you're not. I don't judge the prostitute for providing sex services in a world in which those services are needed. It's not the prostitute's job to tell people that they shouldn't do that.
Yeah, and there's every tool can be used correctly. The
Yeah.
problem
Yeah.
is when you don't use it correctly. Because right, if you take that 6-week supplement blast at the right time, it might do all this stuff. But it's where are we placing it? And as a consumer, you need to be smart enough to make that choice for yourself, not abide by what the provider tells you. So like, right, if your bench press is going to go up 30 pounds, like, am I even in a position, like I said, for fat loss or muscle, am I even in a position to do that? So let's say like one coffee is good enough. And after a month, you're like, one coffee is not good enough. But I did two and I didn't love it. I messed with my sleep. And then it's like, there's no other choice. It's not true. Saffron's wonderful. You add saffron in the morning, enhances the function of your coffee, also helps you go to sleep later at night. Those are like the better choices. I'm like trying and hope to get people to think over time. Because as we oversimplify, people walk away believing that stuff, right? Sometimes we tell people like, oh, I think they know better. It's like, sometimes they don't. Like you tell people that you could do this in 2 weeks, and sometimes they think that's true.
So there's this notion in pharmacology of the minimal effective dose, right? This is something I know Broderick talks about. He doesn't really like how it's used in the popular vernacular because in his mind, any dosage is technically effective. It just determines, it just based upon, what you're trying to measure, right? The precision of those tools. But sort of in drug speak, in popular bodybuilder culture, there's this notion that you should take the minimal effective dose. You should take as little as possible to achieve the result you want. But so here you're talking about, sort of setting expectations for athletes, for customers, sort of making it clear like what kind of progress they can achieve. And so that's the question I've got. Like if we're talking about training interventions or pharmacological interventions, what's a reasonable amount of progress? What should people like? How can we tell if something is effective at a certain dosage or within a certain period of time?
Awesome question. I think this lives at the intersection of what you're doing and what's possible. So what's possible being, where are you demographically? Like demographics exist for a reason because people in the same demographic are similar. So let's say you're in the elite bodybuilding category. You have 10 plus years of competing, whether you have multiple wins or not, you've been going up in the thing and you're a pro, right? So a wonderful year of bodybuilding at the elite is probably 2 to 4 pounds, of lean tissue progress, right? Because what's happening? You've already gotten near the maximum of what's possible. You've applied many intervention strategies, gone from simple to complex, and there's no novelty left for you. You've competed in everything 10 times. You've done this. You've done good shows, bad shows, everywhere else in between. There's not a lot of novelty left. Hans Selye made it very popular what novelty does to the adaptation process. And I think oftentimes we can get stuck in using novelty too often, whether it be from a training or drug use intervention specialist type of way, where it was, oh, new phase, new drugs. But think about it this way. Let's say your goal, and I always tell people like TRT, right? It's the R that makes the most impact on what you're doing, not the T. What are you replacing? I don't care what compound you use. Is the replacement of your life 4,000 steps, like 1,000 calories and sitting on the couch? Or is the replacement aspect of your life, I train 6 times a week, I still work full time, I have 3 kids? The R is mega different. So now let's flip it around. Let's say you've never taken any drugs, you've never committed to anything in your life, and you want to drop 5% body fat. The elite bodybuilder, looking at them through their own eyes, is be like, it might take you a full year, blah, blah, blah. You got to do this, think about clenbuterol, do cardio. It's like, no. That's how you get shredded when you're already shredded, trying to get more shredded and retain glycogen in your muscles. This person doesn't need to count a single calorie. It's like, hey, how about we go 1 week of 0 carbs, then you eat like an adult for a month, and then you come back to me. And that's like, okay, I stopped eating like a child, like an impulsive human being. I had some food responsibility. I ate whatever my wife cooked, but I just didn't have 3 plates of food like a savage. I had like 1 plate of food and maybe a tiny bit more. And I was an adult and I lost 6 pounds. It's like, great. That was putting out a fire, not making progress. So now getting to your question, we need to see, are we putting out a fire or are we making progress? Am I thwarted because I'm making a mistake and then ameliorating or attenuating that mistake, you get way better? That's not progress. You shot yourself in the foot and closed the wound. So I think it all starts with a proper viewpoint on what's actually possible, not just saying 1 year, 5 pounds of muscle. It's like, well, what's possible for who? You could do that crazy stuff in 2 years or 6 months if you're the right guy. And then layer on, now what are you willing to pay the cost for? Most people that sign up for bodybuilding competitions aren't willing to pay that cost. Like I meant the analogy, willing to drink from that cup is like the way. It's like, imagine this cup tastes like crap. And it's like, it's not going to be that bad. You taste it and you're, versus you taste it and you're like, good, I want more, right? That's the difference in goal attainment. So if you reasonably look at yourself, you're like, I want to lose weight, but I don't care all that much. And I'll take a year to get this goal. I'll knock down 5 pounds in a year. That's all right relative to what I'm doing. So if the most people are intermediates, right? Let's say you're an intermediate, either weight loss or muscle gain athlete. I think the 10-pound goal is someone who's going to kill it 365 days a year. You can put on 10 pounds of muscle as not just muscle tissue. We'll just call it lean, everything included in the nuclear domain and stuff. You could make that change in a year as an intermediate. If you're dialed, 365 days is an analogy, but most of the time, if you could probably chop off a solid 5 to 10% body fat in the same manner in a year. If you're an intermediate, you've never tried that hard, you've only been doing it for a bit, and you're not that dedicated, I think people oversee the power of dedication. I think the power of pharmacology is better. What makes pharmacology special is you being a savage, not the pharmacology, right? The drugs work best in the people that work the hardest, I can give you a test trend cycle and you can get fatter.
Yeah,
right?
I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So I think that's the biggest paradox. People are like, I'm going to do this change to my cycle and everything's going to change. It's like, no, it's not. I just got this new belt. I just got these shoes. I just got these new golf clubs. I'm going to this new track. I got these new sneakers. Sneakers is huge in triathlons and marathon running right now. A big thing going on with the super shoe. But it's the human being, I always say, gets their hand raised, not your lactate dehydrogenase score, right? Bodybuilding's not won by grams of glycogen. It's won by a look that a human puts on. That's what makes it a sport, right? It's not a blood test score or anything else. So let's say you want to get bigger and you're like, honestly, bro, I'm weak as piss. It's just honestly, I just am, right? It's you know what? You might be a great candidate for creatine, helping making you jacked. Creatine, TMG, GPC, assuming you don't go the PED route, because you're just so weak, you're not going to cause damage. So creatine, TMG, and GPC might get a weak person jacked, whereas on the strength hypertrophy bias, I'm super all in on the strength side, but naturally, I'm very strong with very little training, but the opposite, my body comp slips away and my aerobic capacity slip away pretty easily. So for me, no supplements make me stronger than just me being me. Right? Obviously PEDs work, but I was just always really strong, right? However, now when I go onto my weakness, the body comp aerobic stuff side, I do need a lot more help. I notice I got to diet a little harder than my wife to lose body fat. But when we go to the gym, I can knock, right now I'm strength training once a week and progressing the way I want to progress in life, but I'm really good at that stuff. Every time I do a creatine kinase test, I'm in the 4 digits, even without really having to do anything for it, right? There are people that take PEDs and they're in the 3 digits still. So recognizing what makes me jacked and what gets me shredded is the more important question.
I love that. Yeah. Okay. So the three big takeaways I got from that is one, you have to set your expectations based upon your cohort, your compatriots, what's reasonable for someone like you in that position. Two, you can make the best progress if you're actually starting from a deficit. Right? If something is wrong, if there's a fire you need to put out, if you fix that, it can seem like you've made incredible progress, but that's actually because you were starting from behind the ball. Right. And that's a great thing. You see that in bodybuilding sometimes where someone will over diet from a show, right? They'll become completely depleted. Maybe they abuse thyroid medications, right? And then they'll have this crazy rebound. And it's like, well, yeah, that's because you're rebuilding the muscle you lost. I'm not saying that isn't cool and impressive, but like you started at a deficit and you got back up to baseline and then you extended beyond that. And then to your last point, right? Also, set those expectations based upon your individual proclivities, right? If you are someone who has a baseline talent for strength, you are probably going to excel more in those areas, and you should base your interventions upon that.
Totally. Because it's funny you brought that up. I struggle with the current culture and conjecture for hypertrophy a lot because it's too acute. People think that changes to myofilaments due to mechanical tension are making your delts rounder or not. That's like the difference between minutes and hours. Mechanical tension changing myofilaments is a month's process. Glycogen and mitochondria impacting intramyocellular lipid droplets is a minutes to hours paradox. So your workout giving you a pump really has nothing to do with you're making long-term change to mechanical aspects like myofilaments. It's just a response of blood, pH, and substrate, right? And they're separate, but I think far too often it's that timeline that gets missed out on. If you want to build muscle through strength training, we're talking long years period of time. We're not talking getting jacked anytime soon. If you want to just change your look for a quick vacation or a quick bodybuilding show, you go in the world of glycolysis. We're talking minutes and hours changes. 2 months out from a show, I'm not worried about mechanical tension anymore. It's like, well, bro, this is a timeline that's greater than 2 months from the show. I should have worried about that 16 weeks ago. It's too late to worry about this now.
Right. So it's not that you're not suggesting that they're wrong, that mechanical tension doesn't promote hypertrophy, but essentially the time frame is wrong. And they're ignoring the fact that, especially when it comes to something like bodybuilding, your physical presentation is actually what matters. So if you can do a shorter term intervention, that's meaningful, even if it's not adding actual myofibrils. Right, like you can still make someone look bigger. You can do that through a lot, right? You can pump them with glycogen and insulin and make someone look huge, and there's no new additional contractile tissue.
Yep. I love Broderick for ragging on the word optimize. It's like, optimize what? I think that's what we need to do with hypertrophy. Hypertrophy of what? Right? Of your cytoplasm containing glycogen storage, of membranous walls, of myofilaments. What do you want to hypertrophy? Your liver? Right? It's like you need to ask better questions, right? So what I would love to see is we need to change the vernacular from hypertrophy to cross-sectional area. And then say, does mechanical tension and that damage improve cross-sectional area better than, let's say, sets of 20? That's the question bodybuilders are concerned of. Hypertrophy's become glorified, right? But it's hypertrophy of what? We care in bodybuilding about cross-sectional area, whereas if we go to weightlifting, we care about the neuromuscular junction. There's hypertrophy occurring in both. And it's more complicated than just sarcoplasmic or myofibril. Hypertrophy should start to become an adjective in people's minds. Optimize what? Hypertrophy what? What do I want to change, right? So again, if you're talking about your delts, we're probably talking type 2 fibers, especially in bodybuilding. If we're talking your quads and marathon running, I'm talking about deep type 1 fibers that are closer to your bone than they're closer to your skin. Hypertrophy of a type 1 fiber, gives you that big blocky look. You just got a bunch of stuff because it's so far away from the skin, it's like the gripe with Halo, right? Oh, it makes you grainy. No, it makes you neuromuscularly active and you get more motor recruitment. Thus, more type 2 fibers are active, so you look like you're flexing when you're not, but it's just tone, right? And I think that's what we need to say. Halo improves cross-sectional area through neuromuscular changes, where we could say anadrol improves cross-sectional area through non-androgen receptor domain changes. Insulin improves cross-sectional area through substrate in the cell, right? We're changing cross-sectional area. None of those are making you stronger per se, let's say, in this moment. None of them are doing the other stuff. It's not even, it's bigger than hypertrophy. It's change. Did my delt from here to here get bigger in size? Yes or no? I don't really care about neuromuscular excitation. I have a competition to win.
So I'm just like I've got this big shit eating grin because I love yeah, but I mean you're right. I mean I think that people don't no one speaks with that level of precision ever, right? So to expect that of athletes who just want their delt to look bigger, I think is hard. But it makes perfect sense, right? I just that's a tough mental bridge to cross, I think, for most people. And
Yeah, it'll get there. I get that, right?
and I actually that kind of does lead me to my next point. So yeah, I know that we've talked about and we started off this conversation talking about energy, and I know that that's often when you talk about training, you'll talk about training different energy systems, right? That's a big thing for you. How would you pitch that to someone? How do you pitch that to the bodybuilding bro who likes to do 3 sets of 10? How do you instead say, hey, let's focus on glycolysis, like let's focus on this energy substrate and train it in this fashion? How would you convince me, right? They're like, I should care about that.
Well, how come you never did 10 sets of three?
How come I never did 10 sets of
You did 3 sets of 10, right? It's the general
Why did I
consensus.
never do 10 sets of three? Probably because I never thought about it, probably.
Well, and
Right?
also, like, what's not happening? We know that the burn, if you will, is where the real muscle's built. And again, truths, I believe, are in real life. So it's like guys like Kai Green, right, do this extended warm up. They make these oxygen changes, and when they're training, it's specific. The work sets are longer than their rest periods. All the elite hypertrophy athletes do these things. So then it's like, what's really happening? Think about your best 3x10. You were kind of breathing heavy. You were so in the zone. You didn't rest much. It's like, you're getting in there. How would you logically perform a 10x3? Bang, bang, right? It's what goes
Mm-hmm.
along with it. So you already inherently know McDonald's gets you fat. The same way 3 sets of 10 might give you a better chance of getting bigger than 10x3. But it's not the fact that you did 3x10 at 300 pounds to, what is it, 900 pounds of tonnage, whatever. I'm not good at mental math right now. But you get my point, right?
Public math is a thing everyone should avoid.
Right? True. But you get my point. Even if we, like, for tonnage and mathematical purposes, let's even say for bar speed purposes, we correlated it. And
Mm-hmm.
mechanical damage, and this is my gripe, would say this is the same. And it'll provide the same results, but we know that's a load of shit. What actually matters, because we all do train hard enough for the most part, right? Like a criterion level of muscle damage amongst people that give a shit is not hard. Like if you care, you're just going to do enough damage naturally. So therefore, I believe what matters more is the environment in which you did that damage. Everyone says like the last few reps are what change you the most. And if we want to believe that as a culture, why would that be? Because you're doing myofibril damage and contractions in the greatest presence of pH change, in the greatest lack of oxygen change. So let's say, what grows better than anything else? Cancer cells, right? Vascular endothelial growth factor and
Yeah.
hypoxia-induced factor do fantastic jobs of getting tumors tons of substrate. So we know nothing is created brand new in the body. So what does VEGF do for muscle cells that aren't dealing with cancer? It's going to take those same substrates and epigenetically allow your cytoplasmic stores for glycogen to expand and allow capillary density and the hemodynamics of the capillaries to change. So then you get more stuff to the muscle cells, right? That's what happens when we make those changes. So we all know deep down in our head that was the best squat set I ever did to get jacked, and here's why. And I just don't think enough people have looked at it and been like, well, what was really happening? They're like, oh, 3 sets of 10 at 315 is what you need to squat to get jacked. It's like, well, maybe that's just the strength parameter. And then if you get there as fast as you can, you'll be deoxygenated. But like I said, if you do 3 sets of 10 forever, you will develop hepatic and fitness related changes where 10 reps will not deoxygenate you and make pH changes the same way it did at the beginning. And that's the plight for periodization.
And that's right. Right. And it also sort of circles back to the discussion of variety, right?
Yes, exactly, right? So epigenetics moves linearly, right? You take Masteron, what's going to happen? We're going to make neuromuscular junction changes, electrical changes, and we're going to upregulate insulin sensitivity by process of higher recruitment of motor neurons and the motor units that they intervene in, and so on and so forth, right? That's how DHTs make you more insulin sensitive. You're doing more neuromuscular electrical work over, let's say 4, 5, 6 months, that's definitely going to make you strong, especially going back to the beginning of the podcast. So
Right.
why do people notice that makes you strong and jacked? Because you're doing more better work and more better reps, right? More better, being grammatically, like a whatever. But you get my point, right?
Yeah, yeah.
People say DECA doesn't get you that strong. Every now and then you hear a guy or two say like, MPP makes me crazy strong. But what you really see is what it should do is it should make it that you could train forever. You could just keep getting a pump, keep going, keep repping shit out, and you should be able to use food better. And that makes sense. That is what that happens. And then people take DECA and don't have food discipline issues, and they say it gets you fat, just like D-ball. The drug isn't getting you fat. You got you fat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then, how do you think we should approach something of if we have? Okay, let's actually use examples to use. Right, we've got Masteron, we've got Deca. How would we approach rather than just using more Masteron? Right, like these adaptations take time. We know that generally speaking, there's a linear dose response to these substances. You could just keep cranking up the volume, but clearly, like there's diminishing returns. So, at what point would we decide that no, we're rather than increase the signal, we should seek a different intervention?
Great question. I think your attainment of the adaptation will tell you the answer. So let's say you're like, oh, every time I go into a bodybuilding prep, the second my food gets low enough, I just turn into like the weakest little feline in the world. It's like, okay, that means one, we have increased neuromuscular demands when food is low, but two, there's an actual need that I referenced in TRT, just
Yeah.
we will need more. But I think the bigger problem is people aren't willing to do less. So let's say you want to get the adaptation early in prep. You will need, let's say you attain it. Let's say the problem you have in prep is work capacity. Like in the off season, I could train forever, but then I lose it all. It's like, all right, let's maybe take GW, ACAR, and DECA in higher doses. End of the off season, beginning of prep. So we get these adaptations firmly put in there. And once we get visual confirmation that they are for sure good, cut that dose in a third and allow it to simmer like a crock pot because you've already made the epigenetic changes. So now this will continue them and let you, like a good chess player, say, now what used to be, let's say, a gram, just easy number, 1,000 milligrams of like this combo of stuff that gave me 16 weeks of this results, I could probably maintain it with 300 milligrams, which now gives me 600 milligrams to play with of other stuff.
People think about that in terms of blasting and cruising, in terms of a replacement dose. But I feel like people don't think of that in terms of your middle of course design.
Yep, and even people assume most goes with the peak. Broderick did a great job of telling people about the calculator math. Like, if you do this, taking the most the week before, it's not going to be in your blood the most next week. It'll be a couple of weeks thereafter. And right. I remember he showed me, and I'm so grateful for Broderick. He's such a great guy. He exposed me to that at a very young age. So then I realized, I was like, wait, if you suck absolutely, like, every now and then we have an athlete that's up here at one thing and just like literally worst at the other thing. It's like, why don't you blast in the off season and get really good at what you're horrible at and then just run a more moderate cycle because you're already good at everything else. And I think like we just like get so zoned in on like, I got to only go up with the dial as I get closer. It matters more, take more. That's not true. If you're playing chess and like, you want to be good at it, your first move matters. It's not like, I'm just going to put a couple chess pieces out there and then like once this guy like puts me in check the first time, I'll take it serious. We're spending thousands of dollars on these sports, right? It's not just a hobby. My good friend Pip, who might be a great guest for you from Scotland, just put a post like it's not a hobby in this exact way. You're spending thousands of dollars. You're sacrificing things. You care a lot. Why would you, one, degrade yourself by saying that? And two, like take a laissez-faire approach to something you clearly care so much about. Like that's why I never understood, and this is why I think pro sports just kind of sucked me up. I couldn't mentally process why people messed up so much in the off season. It's like, do you suddenly not care about your goal anymore? And then pro sports puts pressure on people that they have to care all the time for the most part. So I just gravitated towards that. But it's like, you told me you wanted to get leaner and you didn't get leaner. I don't understand why that happened. And I always struggled with that. So it's like, if you're horrible at something, and let's say you know you're really good at prep, there's nothing wrong with taking a bigger cycle in the off season and then taking a smaller cycle in prep. It's the optimal response is the optimal response, not more is better.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think most people aren't really conducting a needs analysis.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's what it comes down to. People are not, they're just like, oh, I need to be bigger or whatever, right? Like if there's any thought given to it, they're not actually assessing like, these are my weaknesses. This is where I can actually use pharmacology or a training intervention or whatever to actually shore up those deficits. I just don't think that question even gets asked.
Yeah, I agree. So one of the things I think helped me a lot was when I was coaching publicly, I collected in-house data on everyone. Hey, what changed? What changed? What seems to change amongst cohorts, demographics? And when I
Hmm.
talk to personal trainers, coaches, business owners in the fitness industry, I'm like, if you have people and you're not collecting in-house data, you're missing out on half the good stuff. So you could say people like, hey, I saw people with heart rates above 100 and stress problems typically lose weight the best on this type of fat loss plan. So it's a double whammy. As the coach, you now don't need to ask as many questions because in your demographic, you see that people with high heart rates that are stressed lose weight on this type of fat loss plan. So your programming time gets cut in half to start because you already at least know what ballpark you're in, and then you only need to focus on them, and then it works out better on their end because you can now actually make a better promise to them. You're like, hey, the last 10 clients I've seen, everyone lost at least 4% body fat when they had high heart rate, stress, chronic fatigue style life issues, and then did this type of plan. I know it's yoga. I know it's relaxing meditation. I know it's easier workouts, but if this is what you want, to lose fat, this is your demographic, this is what happens.
Brilliant. All right, I want to ask like one final question that's actually kind of selfish, but
Please.
I feel like you are probably the best person I can imagine to answer this question. So you strike me as someone who thinks and talks quickly. That seems to be pretty characteristic of you. I would also say that's true of me, and that I also struggle with accuracy. So I think I mentioned before I did some translation work. One thing that's always been the case for me is when I write quickly, I will leave words out. And I think that what's happening is that my brain is sort of chunking, right? And like, I think it's there because I've completed the thought in my brain, but I'm moving so quickly that I miss it. And I think I do these kinds of things. I think that's my deficit. I can move quickly, I can think quickly, but my brain is chunking and I'm missing things. Do you think that even makes sense as a conceptual framework?
Of course.
And like, how would you seek to remedy that, or would you?
Yeah, no, it's actually incredibly well studied. This is why sometimes I realize I'm a nerd because I'm like, oh, I don't know, this like super random stuff. And people ask me a random question. The other night, not to go on a rant, my wife was like, "What's that called when like they stuff animals?" I was like, "I don't know." And she's like, "No, you do. I'm sure you do. They stuff animals, they kill them." I'm like, "Oh, taxidermy." She's like, "See, told you." And it's funny how we remember certain things,
Yeah.
but that's actually pretty well studied. So what happens is your arcuate fasciculus is the superhighway, let's call it. And it's going to connect a lot of frontal cortex and limbic stuff to your sensory areas, specifically speech, like Broca, Wernicke's, information processing, and auditory. And these are two distant areas that are connected by this superhighway, right? So for good communication, we need all the electricity and information translation, funny, we talked about this at the beginning of the podcast, to be aligned and synced up. So if one area can't keep up electrically, then you're going to have that deficit. So I'm the same way. Like I don't do any caffeine at the moment. I'm zero on the stimulants at the moment because I'm already zippy, bro. Like I'm sure you realize that
Yeah, I am the same. I don't take stimulants
I don't need.
I'll freak out. It's too
Yes,
much.
I have that. It's funny, it goes with the conversation today. So what helps me actually, and what I would recommend to you is like, as a warm up for that work, read either some like imaginative fiction or something philosophical or something like religious, like that makes you ponder and think about the difference between words because it will align what's likely like the areas that have to do with like words, verbal and phonetic like associations together because that might be going slower than the speed of your nervous system and how fast you can think.
What I love about, I think that's brilliant, and what I love about that is that I do read fanciful fiction, and I will skip over parts of it. Like I actually like I will do the exact opposite of what you're recommending because I'm lazy. Which again circles back to what we talked about before of just people are looking for the easy way out in situations.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just like our natural superpowers that make us want to do that. But that's like all the more reason. Like a great way to slow you down might be like after every chapter, you have to draw a picture of what happened, and like force you to really get in the grains of that stuff. Like I think my favorite thing and the most universal thing amongst all the pro athletes I work with is I give them weird homeworks that challenge them in these ways. Like if someone's really struggling with something, I'm like, go make a Venn diagram. And I want you to write down what actually happened in one bubble, what you believe happened in the other bubble, and that means the middle is your perception of the two. And I want you to walk yourself through how you got to that thought, because that thought's illogical and that's inappropriate. So I want you to prove it to yourself how you got there. And then usually they get there and they're like, oh man, yeah, that was stupid. I see that now. Right? But we just need to get out of our own way half the times.
Wow. Is that how common do you recommend an intervention like that? This sort of
Um,
homework?
I try to make someone have the homework every time we have longer calls. Like people I see in person, not so much. We more just have good conversations and I provoke these things. But when it's people that I talk to every now and then, because there's very few athletes I'm very close with. Most people, it's like I'm like the emergency Andy button. It's like something's wrong or whatever question, hit me up, talk soon, whatever. That's usually when I prescribe that stuff the most.
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah, that I'm gonna try to steal that for sure.
Please do. The more, like, I think, like, to end on the note, like, sharing service, charity, and helping people is what the important things are, not getting credit for stuff. I think people, we get so ego driven, like, especially with social media, like like you said, this exercise will get the bench press up. It's like, no, it's the calcium ions and the person doing the bench press that got their bench press up. It's not the machine. The machine is just a machine. It's a toaster, right? If your toaster doesn't work, you throw it in the garbage. No one ever puts posts like, this chest press tore my pec. Like, right? It's like, because we know it's going to tear your pec, or, like, we don't have to elucidate and like shout out and highlight those things to know they're true.
Yeah, brilliantly said. Thanks, man. Yeah, so you're Andy of GoSuperbrain.com. I know I listen. So actually, real quick, what's the status of your? You have a 501(c)(3), right? That's
Yeah,
focused
so
on.
it's all going to come out very soon. I like to go slow, but I got a patent passed by the USPTO on a method and system of analyzing and improving muscle protein synthesis in foodstuffs. So that one took quite a while. That's going to be a company on its own that starts up soon. I have the nonprofit I'll kind of leak out here is based on the neurobiology of autism, and its plight is clarity of reading research and understanding the biology of autism, because it's very fragmented for a lot of different people, especially depending on what they have for work. Like people who are ABAs in schools think about autism so different than people that work privately, than people who are in the research field or doctors, right? So my goal is clarity there. Then I have 2 or 3 other small side projects. One's a novel food product that will be very cool. One has to do with like some foot technology in a specific sport field, and that's all I'll let go for now.
Awesome. Thanks so much, man. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.